Today we're going to solve a mystery. We're going to do it by accumulating and examining evidence that leads to the historical Jesus the Nazarene, not the mythological Jesus from Nazareth. You're going to be able to see an image of Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the prime of their lives. And if you're open to thoughtful reflection and ready to question long-held assumptions, you might find that the real story of Jesus is not about blood sacrifice, but something far more profound, more reasonable, and more empowering. In the latter part of the first century, Rome's Porta Maggiore and the Baker's Tomb greeted visitors as they arrived from the east. The Via Praestina was one of the most important roads entering Rome because it was used for commerce and religious pilgrimages. The Via Labicana, it was known for serving local traffic and grain transport. Now, these roads not only brought people to the heart of Rome, they converged at this site, which is layered with spiritual symbolism, setting the stage for a mystery buried in stone and silence, awaiting rediscovery centuries later, today. According to Wikipedia and other sources, the Baker's Tomb is a monument that was constructed to celebrate the financial success of a former slave, baker, and that the baker built the tomb for himself and perhaps also his wife Atistia around the end of the Republic, 50 to 20 BCE. End quote. Now, this dating was first disputed by John Henry Parker in 1876, and it's supported more recently in 2012. Wikipedia continues, quote, a tower subsequently erected by Honorius covered the tomb, the remains of which were exposed upon its removal by Gregory XVI in 1838. What is particularly significant about this extravagant tomb is that it was built by a freedman, a former slave. No, the significance of this tomb and the massive structure built over it isn't just the architecture, it's in the timing. After Christianity became the official religion of Rome, efforts began in earnest to erase all earlier religious traditions. There was a Nasai Gamaliel VI, who was the last in the line going all the way back to the first century and the house of Hillel. And he was still teaching the Nazarene way, even as pressure mounted. But in 415, they took away his title and his power. And between 420 and 423, the tomb and Rome's East Gate, which was a replica of Jerusalem's East Gate, were buried beneath this massive stone structure. And by the time of Gamaliel's death in 425, the church had already redirected temple revenues and extinguished the public role of the Nasai. So what we see in this stone is not just a tomb, it's a monument to silenced truth, buried but never fully erased. Nicene Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire in 380, and then came the purge of all non-Christian sacred spaces, all during the 5th century. It was a systematic erasure of polytheistic, mystical, and syncretic traditions, and it resulted in the destruction of major temples all throughout the Roman Empire. The temple to Serapis, the Library of Alexandria, the temple of Isis, the temple of Artemis, the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, the temple of the Vestal Virgins, the temple of Zeus, and others. Pagan and Neo-Pythagorean priests were removed or sometimes executed. Scrolls were burned, statues toppled, often replaced by icons of saints or repurposed into Christian churches. Now, it was during this purge, sometime between 400 and 440, that Pope Francis's favorite icon, the Salus Populi Romani, arrived at the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore, where he's been laid to rest. In 1838, Pope Gregory uncovered the baker's tomb, the Porta Maggiore, and a Neo-Pythagorean temple that was beneath them, reviving interest in Rome's subterranean religious history, especially concerning syncretic religions. Pope Gregory supported archaeological excavations under and around the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore. He even founded an Egyptian museum, which suggests a special interest in Egyptians. And in 1839, Pope Gregory forbid Catholics from participating in or supporting the Atlantic slave trade. Now, it's possible that Pope Gregory's interest in these syncretic religions and the founding of his Egyptian museum were set in motion by these images and this letter from Emperor Hadrian to Servianus in about 134. Hadrian writes, Egypt, which you committed to me, my dear Servianus, I have found to be wholly fickle and inconsistent, and continually wafted about by every breath of fame. Worshippers of Serapis here are called Christians, and those who are devoted to the god Serapis call themselves bishops of Christ. Note the image of Serapis, kind of looks like Jesus, but he's wearing a modius cup on his head. But notice those spriggly things around his head. We're told that is depicting the light coming from him, but it looks more like maybe twigs or thorns. And what did Pope Gregory find when he uncovered the tomb? Well, he found this dedication in stone to Adestia, inscribed by her husband to honor his beloved wife. He writes, Adestia was my wife. She lived with me for many years. She was a most excellent woman, whose remains are laid to rest in the breadbasket. Now, I've enlarged the name over here on the right to show that Adestia is two words. Adus was a god who castrated himself, bled to death beneath a pine tree, but was resurrected by the goddess Cybele. It was celebrated throughout Rome during the Ides of March. Now, the Hebrew word etz, which is pronounced etis, is translated tree, and thea or thea is translated goddess. And Pope Gregory discovered the breadbasket, Adestia's urn. The inscription on the urn is Amian, Amion, from amiantos, which is defined undefiled, pure, immaculate. A word often used in sacred or ritual contexts, and a word used to describe the Virgin Mary. Now, also inscribed on this urn are the letters ANV, which is the year 5 of Vespasian's reign. Not coincidentally, his co-ruler, called Antonia Caenus, died in 75 CE. And curiously, the mythological Caenus asked Neptune to turn her into a male because she'd been raped. So we keep having these instances of women becoming or pretending to be male. Now, curiously, the location of Adestia's breadbasket is unknown today. The inscription found with Adestia's urn speaks of purity, reverence, and time. But her husband's urn? Well, it remains unacknowledged. No record, no tribute, no name. And yet, we can assume he was her beloved. But what happened to his story? Where is his urn? Why is it silenced? This slide invites us to wonder, to imagine what inscription might one day be uncovered or remembered if both urns are somehow discovered. And Pope Gregory found this full-length relief portrait of a man in toga and a woman in palla, formal Roman attire. But in 1934, Adastia's head was removed, and shortly thereafter, the relief went missing for decades until about 2019. A plaster replacement head was created and the relief restored, and it's now available to be viewed at the Centrale Montemartini Museum in Rome. Pope Gregory would have known of these syncretic names because he seemed interested in these items. He would have known that Osiris and Apis were fused to create the god known as Serapis in Egypt. Hermes and Anubis became Hermanubis, and Yahweh and Zeus became Yazus. And in English, we say Jesus. Now, these weren't just casual nicknames, they were theological engineering. And the purpose was to unify diverse worshippers under a single divine entity. Serapis unified Egypt, and Yazus was supposed to merge the houses of Shammai and Hillel, Yahweh and Elohim, with Rome's imperial pantheon headed by Zeus. Now, we need to stop for a moment to take a look at Biblical Hebrew, just a reminder for those who haven't heard this already, that Biblical Hebrew is the consonant-only script. No vowels, no spaces, no punctuation. An example I'm going to show here is the BTLHM, which can be read Bethlehem, the little town, but Betulem is Virgin Mother, and Bet Elohim is House of Gods, and Bet Elohim is Daughter of Goddess Mother, or Bethlehem, House of Bread. Each of these words is correct. Long before Paul's Christians appeared, two schools in Jerusalem debated the nature of the Torah. The house of Shammai emphasized obedience to Yahweh's commands, the Ten Commandments, hear and obey. And the name Shammai encompasses the word Shama, which is translated hear and obey. The house of Hillel, HLLL, embraced God Goddess. And in fact, HLLL can be Hala LL, which is translated praise God Goddess. The founders debated civilly. Their disciples did not. And over time, as the conflict grew, peaceful coexistence gave way to something more forceful and more faithful and far more consequential. Now let's take a look at Genesis 1:1 and the Hebrew consonants BRST, BRLHM. Shammai adds vowels and spaces to create the words Bereshit bara Elohim, translated in the beginning created gods. The im suffix is the plural, gods, not God. Nasai Hillel's vowels, spaces, and punctuation create the words Bar Ish Et Babor Elohim, translated Son of Man and Father Light, Goddess Mother. Hillel's Nazarene Holy Trinity explains the 80+ references to Son of Man in the New Testament, and it identifies Hillel's version of the Torah as the version that Jesus the Nazarene was teaching. Hillel's grandson was Gamaliel, GMLL, which can become Gamma Ella and translated God Goddess within. His sons were known as Yazus bar Gamaliel and Yazus bar Damnaeus. And also in Alexandria, the Alabarch of Alexandria, LBRK, is translated goddess blessed. So all of these people are connected to the tradition of the god goddess. Now, Alexandria's Alabarch was imprisoned by Emperor Caligula. But when Claudius was inaugurated in 41, first thing he did was release Alexander. Now, this historical fact is echoed in Acts 7, where Stephanos, which is the Greek word for crown, is actually a symbol of for Nazarene because Nazar also is translated crown. So these names reveal the connection between the historical event and this event that was created by the author of Acts to point to that historical event. Jesus was more than a name, it's a syncretic title. It was given to the descendants of Hillel. It was given to Jerusalem's high priests, the Nazarenes. And they had quite a mission. They were supposed to fuse the divine authority of Shammai's Yahweh with Hillel's Elohim and the imperial force of Zeus. The aim was spiritual unity across the Roman Empire. And in this fusion, even the divine consorts played a role because Zeus had a wife named Hera. HR is Ha-ora, or the light. At one time, Yahweh had a spouse or consort called Asherah, from the words Isha'ora, which are translated woman light. But in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, Deuteronomists erased Asherah from Scripture. In fact, they recasted her as a threat. And yet, archaeology tells a different story because they've now discovered ancient inscriptions that say, "Blessed be you by Yahweh and his Asherah," and others. But patriarchal editors removed Asherah's voice and turned her into an enemy. So Yazuz wasn't just a theological merger. It was a memory of balanced light and the Divine Mother, fighting to survive the silencing force of orthodoxy. The author of Acts tells us incredibly important information about Paul, especially at Acts 22:3, where Paul says, "I am a Jew, brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God." So in this one verse, we learn that Paul was a disciple of Gamaliel and he was a zealot. Now, the author of Acts is setting the stage to reveal this very complex conflict between Paul and Gamaliel, because in 66, a group called Zealots forcibly removed Gamaliel and his sons, the high priest called Jesus, from the temple. Now, this rupture between Paul and his teacher is central to understanding Paul's later actions, because using his pseudonym Matthias, which is Greek for disciple, he repurposed Mark's midrash to construct a new gospel. He coined Jesus from Nazareth, a very distinct person from the Nazarene, because he rejected God Goddess. He was determined to enshrine vicarious atonement as the bedrock of his emerging church. Eventually, Paul or Matthias and Shammai zealots were expelled from the temple, and the temple was destroyed by Hillel's descendants, the Nazarenes, who are also known as Neo-Pythagoreans, by the way. Titus was Vespasian's son, and Tiberius Julius Alexander was the son of the Alabarch of Alexandria. So they erased one legacy and laid the foundation for another. Now, Emperor Claudius had already begun preparing Rome to replace Jerusalem. He had constructed this monumental East Gate, which is a mirror of Jerusalem's East Gate, anticipating a spiritual relocation. But Paul's invention of Jesus from Nazareth threatened to unravel the harmony established by Jesus the Nazarene and Mary the Magdalene, the great mother of glory. This unification between Jewish and Greco-Roman theologies was fragile. And to preserve the truth from distortion, two sacred stone artifacts were created. The first was the baker's tomb, and the second was a cameo titled The Triumph of Joseph at Court of the Pharaoh. These were not just relics, they were warnings. More important, they were witnesses. They were created to preserve the truth. This is the cameo known as the Triumph of Joseph at the Court of the Pharaoh. And it was identified on the invoice when it was shipped to Paris as a relic of Christ. The story of Joseph's triumph at court of the Pharaoh comes from Genesis 40, verses 22 and 23. And I've shown the Hebrew consonants there for those two verses. And Shammai's translation. But he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Now, Hillel's equally valid rendering translation of those same consonants, and I've given those words for you biblical scholars out there who want to double check our work. But Hillel's translation is that the woman of light, the baker, is Ella, Kesar's firstling, Ella, the mother of Joseph. But God is male, a man with womb acquired, mother of Joseph, but she is forgotten. This cameo, like the tomb, encodes a memory too dangerous to leave unguarded. Genesis 40:23, according to Hillel, gives us quite a startling image. It says, God is male, a man with a womb acquired, mother of Joseph but forgotten. Now, this is echoed by the closing line of the Gospel of Thomas saying, 1:14, quote, Jesus says, I will guide Mary to make her male, so she will be honored and remembered. In patriarchal societies, women often had to disguise themselves as men or have their work attributed to men just to be remembered. But this ties back to the story of Joseph's mother, the baker, in Egypt, the one who had to pretend to be a male in order to avoid being crucified. These are three enlargements from the cameo. Upper right, you can see Cleopatra holding the Eye of Ra. Also is Julius Caesar victorious on Pegasus, and the figure between them is called the Lares of Augustus, which signifies an inauguration. And in this case, it's the inauguration of Claudius, and it dates the scene to January 24th, 41. We still don't know when the cameo was commissioned, but this dates the scene that's being depicted. Now, left side, Germanicus gazes lovingly at his wife Agrippina. And look closely. Emperor Tiberius is passing the shield of Zeus and Pallas Athena to Germanicus and Agrippina, while holding the emperor's staff just out of Claudius's reach. Now, the de facto rulers during Claudius's reign were the freedmen Narcissus and Pallas, and that's the couple receiving the shield. Lower right, Empress Julia the Elder sits on her throne. And again, look closely. Her middle finger points at Julia the Younger's husband, Lucius Marcus Paulus, who sits there dejected and shamed because in 40 he threatened to stone Alabarch Alexander. But he was given a second chance and he blew it again. Because in 66 he drove Nasai Gamaliel and his sons Yazus and Yazus from the temple. We're going to look again at Genesis 40:23. The Hebrew words for woman of light are Ishaorah. Abram's name was changed to Abraham, and Sarah's name was changed to Sarah. BRM, Abram, is translated Father Exalted, and SR, Sarah, is translated Seed. But El Shaddai, by the way, the Hebrew word for breast is shad. So God with breasts changed their names to BRHM and SRH. Abraham, which is translated father of womb, or Bar Ha-im, son of the mother, or Abel, father El, which evolved into Baal, and his wife, Ishaora, woman of light, also known as Asherah. This image on the left is one of the things found in these searches in Israel that are identified as the Asherah, the consort of Yahweh, the entity the Deuteronomists tried to eradicate because she was a threat to monotheism and misogyny and Yahweh. And for example, First Kings and Second Kings condemned the planting of sacred trees because they were called Asherim. And it shows how widespread her popularity was. In Ugaritic texts, Asherah is a mother goddess nourishing gods from her breasts and living in a sacred grove of trees by the sea. So the tree of life, in Hebrew, Etz HaChai, Genesis 2 and 3, is a residual mythology, an echo of Asherah, the lost feminine divine presence. Asherah is often interpreted as being a tree of life figure, which embodies fertility, divine connection, and feminine wisdom, the life-giving power. The names on the baker's tomb give us more clues. Marcei Vergilei Eurysacis conceals a much deeper meaning, especially through the lens of biblical Hebrew. The name Mar is from Mara, which means compassionate. Or can be Mother Light or Mary. The CEI relates to Chi or Ki, which is translated life. And Vergilii suggests a virgin of Ella, the goddess. Now, looking at the name Eurysacis and converting it into Hebrew consonants, RYSKS, once again, we find or for light. Aya was a goddess of dawn known as the light bringer. Ish is translated man. Ki, or Kisar, is the first mother, mentioned at Genesis 40:23. And Isha means woman. So these names, these words, this sentence says literally the light was brought to mankind through Kisar women. And that's why Deuteronomy silenced Asherah. The Hebrew word for tree, etz, pronounced Edis or Addis, echoes her name, Tia. It was more than a name. She was the embodiment of Asherah, the woman of light. The tomb and its sacred gifts were buried until 1838. Pope Gregory XVI was fascinated by Egyptian culture and syncretic and early Christian symbols, and he started digging. And what did the excavations around the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore uncover? Well, a duplicate of Jerusalem's East Gate, the Baker's Tomb, a Neo-Pythagorean temple, a relief portrait of Tia and her husband, and urns. Oh, 2 urns. Marcus composed a midrash, a script for a play. It was to celebrate the triumph of Joseph at the court of the Pharaoh, the story of the baker. And in this retelling, Joseph's mother Kisar's firstling, Asherah, tree of life, is condemned to be crucified, but she's saved by disguising herself as a male. And then Matthias, the pseudonym for Paulus, wrote a gospel to replace Mark's midrash. He took LHM's Jesus the Nazarene and replaced him with Yahweh's Jesus from Nazareth. He discarded the golden rule and replaced it with vicarious atonement. No longer lambs for sacrifice, now a God-man from Nazareth. Now Luke and the author of Acts understood the deception. Luke's gospel hides truths in riddles, and the author of Acts encoded the rift between Paul and Gamaliel, between those who served Yazoo and those who inherited the light of God, Goddess the Mother. And through layered enigmas, he tried to preserve the titles of Jerusalem's high priests, the descendants of Hillel, before they were forgotten. Yazoo, Heidel. Now, the shield that's being passed to Germanicus and Agrippina has always been associated with myths of Zeus and the goddess Pallas Athena, who often disguised herself as a man. So Germanicus is accepting the shield of Zeus because he played the role of Yazoo. And Mary, whom Jesus helped make male, Mary Magdalene, Jesus guided her to become Pallas, the powerful freedman, shown here accepting the shield of Pallas Athena in this scene depicting the inauguration of Claudius. Mary was also known as Philo of Alexandria, a male. And at the time of her death, Mary was known as Antonia Caenis, Vespasian's freedwoman, who died in the 5th year of Vespasian's reign. The genius. Yazis came from BTLHM, Betulem, Virgin Mother. Bat Elohim, a daughter of Goddess Mother, in Bethlehem, the little town. And then his ashes, along with his wife's, were preserved in a Bethlehem, house of bread. They left evidence and they left proofs. The tomb is empty, but their message survives in stone. Pope Francis left an undeniable clue when he chose the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore as his final resting place. But he left it up to Pope Leo to reveal the truth about Yazoo and Paul, the truth that the church has known for all its history and hidden. No better time than today. And notably, the Hebrew El for Ella can also be rendered Leo. Leo. It's up to you.